Before we start with the questions, I would like my panel to introduce itself. We have a fantastic panel here today. Bao-Y of Target Global, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here today. Hi, everyone. I'm Bao-Y. I'm a partner at Target Global. We manage about $3.5 billion investing across Europe and Israel. I'm based out of London, focusing on Series A, B, where I invest 10 to 30 million into companies. We've backed some great companies out of Europe. We're fortunate to back the likes of Delivery Hero, Auto1, WeFox, Rapid, and many more, over 100 portfolio companies in total.
Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Hynes. I'm a partner with Atomico, colleague of Tibau, who you met earlier. Been with Atomico for 10 years, and I head up our growth acceleration platform. And then I also help portfolio companies build their people operating systems. Before Atomico, I was head of talent at Skype, and took us from 300 to 3,000 in 3 years. And before that, I was head of talent at Google, took us from about 100 in London to about 10,000 in 5 years.
Yeah. Last but not least, Johannes, Reck, the CEO of GetYourGuide. Let me ask a question. Are there people in the room that don't know GetYourGuide? Just a few, so that's it.
We'll get them later.
Any customers in the room? Yeah, could be more. We'll do better in Belgium in the future.
Yeah. Go ahead, Johannes.
So I'm the co-founder and CEO of GetYourGuide. GetYourGuide is the globally leading marketplace for travel experiences. So we sell anything from tickets to the Eiffel Tower all the way to the small waffles workshop and chocolate workshop here in Brussels. And we've sold 80 million tickets since our existence, 40 million just in the last 18 months after the end of the lockdowns.
Yeah. My first experience was a very nice one. I used GetYourGuide for a visit of the Taj Mahal in India.
Oh, nice. I've actually never been. I'd love to go.
Yeah, I have very fond memories of this.
It's amazing.
The first question I would like to ask to Bao-Y is, of course, expanding internationally is very important for startups and scale-ups. It's one of the key things that makes or breaks a success. But we did a survey in Belgium recently among Belgian scale-ups, and they've told us that actually they want to slow down with their international strategy, and that they are becoming more cautious, that they want to focus on core markets like Belgium, like the Netherlands first, and if that works, maybe go broader. Is this the new normal for startups and scale-ups? So are they less born globals than they used to be? And from a VC perspective, how do you look at this? Is this a good trend? Is this a good way of doing things?
Yeah, so maybe let me sort of preface about why, as VCs, or why is there a perception that obviously we as VCs are looking for international companies. You're obviously looking at a global market. We want to back global champions, and that's why typically when we're looking at companies, we assess how international are they, and are they just successful in their home market. Now, I think there's a couple of exceptions of why it's for some companies it makes sense to be global from day one, and for others it's not, right? And I think there's different reasons to why they wouldn't want to go global. So maybe let me give you an example. Let's say if it's a product-led growth company, right? Typically from day one they're operating globally. So the more product-led it is, the more marketing-driven it is, as opposed to sort of sales-driven. The more we sort of see that, right? And we obviously like, as VCs, from a scalability perspective, we like it. And then sort of on the other extreme, we sort of see companies that are maybe like super vertical, and sort of have maybe only a universe of, let's say, 100 customers or something overall in the total market, but they're really, really large. And so those typically are global from day one as well, because maybe the largest player in their specific space is out of France, and they're maybe a German company, and they sort of serve that from day one. Now, I think for some companies, actually, it does not make sense to go internationally so early. And if we're looking at, for example, B2B marketplaces, right, you need to build density. Sometimes, you have an operational element in it. Your gross margin is maybe very low. And I think specifically in times where capital is not so abundant, right, it makes sense to sort of build, to always pick like the lowest hanging fruit. And depending on your business model, that could also be just being, building a really, really strong player in one or two markets, and your time is large enough, and you build a large enough sort of case for an investor in VC to invest. So I think there's different perspective at which you can look at it. Sometimes it's also coming from a place of, oh, I know this geography, I know the customers, and I sell to them first, right? And that's the wrong motive to do it. So I think it depends on the motive.
And have you also seen a difference in mindset over the last few months or over the last year with your companies?
I think companies are just more cashful with cash, right? I think maybe like 2 years ago, cash was trash. Now cash is king, right? And I think everybody's looking at runway way more carefully now than maybe they did sort of 2 years ago, where capital was so abundant, you were out in the market, and the founders were saying, "Oh yeah, we've already got 5 term sheets, and you've got 24 hours to decide if you want to join or not." So I think everybody's just more sort of calculating with what are the best opportunities and how to go about them first. And I think that's the right thing of going about it.
Yeah. Johannes, GetYourGuide is, of course, a very global company. Can you relate to the caution that we see now with the startups and the scale-ups in Europe, that they've become more cautious with their international expansion? Would this have worked for you, also knowing that you raised already $800 million?
Yeah, I can totally relate, because GetYourGuide was bootstrapped for the first couple of years of its existence from 2010 to 2014, and the venture market back then was very much what it was like today. It took 6 to 12 months to actually raise my A round and my B round, so I totally know what it's like, and I can only echo what I think Mickey from Vault said earlier on the stage today. Survive is the #1 rule of a startup in the early days, and that's the way how it should be. I think 2020 and 2021 were abnormal, and I think we're now going back to more normal times where cash preservation and efficient investing and innovation are actually critical for startups to survive and thrive.
Yeah. You mentioned that you bootstrapped. We have 2 VCs on stage as well. Can you tell us something about the importance of VCs in your trajectory as drivers for the growth of GetYourGuide?
For GetYourGuide, VC funding was instrumental in building the company that we have today. The company that we have today is 800 plus people, so like very significant revenues, a lot of scale across multiple markets, and that would have not been possible without very significant investment and upfront investment in the platform, in product, in supply, and brand. So the way how I always describe it is nail it before you scale it. So we really nailed our business model in the first couple of years until it really worked and until customer acquisition was profitable end to end. And then we could invest to scale it. And I think that's the right way to go about it. I think the problem in 2020 and 2021 was that a lot of companies were raising cash without having those proof points, and they were scaling too quickly, and now they need to cut back. And cutting back is painful. I mean, like, I went through COVID. I know what it's like, right? So this is something that's very demoralizing for the workforce. You lose trust, and then you need to build it back up later. And so like the difference between COVID, which was like just a 2-year blip, to today, which is probably more like a 3, 4, 5, 6-year permanent reset, is that a lot of companies will need to reset to a new normal where you have an indefinite timeline ahead of you. And I think that will require very different entrepreneurial skills than the ones that you had in the boom years.
Yeah. Dan, let's go to you. We've seen that big tech has been organizing quite a few layoffs. Big companies, but also smaller companies, are letting a lot of people go these days. From a talent perspective, is this becoming an interesting period? Because a lot of startups and scale-ups are looking for top talent. We already heard this from previous speakers. So a lot of talent is becoming available now with the many layoffs. So,
yeah, no, I think it's different. So 2 or 3 years ago, you couldn't get these C-levels or senior operators out of these growth stage companies. They were sat on tens of millions of potential invested equity, and they just wouldn't make the jump. The folks that had exited were more interested in taking sabbaticals and jumping back in. Working with founders is tough. You're a unique breed, and you have to be in tune with the founder mindsets. That's the tough thing. But what we are seeing is people will now be more thoughtful about the opportunity. So, I would encourage people to look at opportunities with a bit more of a VC investor mindset. So the team, the CEO, the marketplace, the product, the runway, all the things that we would potentially look at as an employee should look at, being very transparent. But they will move. And I think who's talking about earlier? I think Mickey was talking about wooing people. Dating is like hiring, and building relationships with the right people, taking your time, doing more due diligence on the candidates, and then the closing process. But I would say it's easier, but you have to work harder for them to make that leap. And then for engineers, engineers really have the pick of the bunch. Worst case scenario for an engineer today is he or she works at Facebook and makes 200K. That's the backup plan, basically. So I think it's easier. I think you need to be better. I think you need to spend a bit more time selling and assessing, and then be very deliberate about onboarding and integrating. But I think it's certainly easier.
Yeah, because European companies tend to underinvest in hiring, while American companies hire from the start, build a whole strategy around it. Do you think this is going to change, that the mindset in Europe is going to change now with all the layoffs?
I think it depends on the company, so each company is different. If you have product market fit and it's a land grab, you need to have a highly efficient, highly effective recruit machine. If you are still figuring out product market fit, I think having 1 or 2 recruiters that can go and cherry pick these key operators or key engineers or whatever. But if you have something where you've got product market fit, you found the fire, what we see in the US is Series A companies are hiring recruiters, 2 or 3 by the time they're 20 people. We have many conversations with our portfolio companies about making sure that they understand the power of recruiting. I think this is a competitive advantage, especially here in Europe. And we've made a deliberate effort to make sure we know the best recruiters, the best TA people. We work very closely with founders in terms of org design and leadership competencies and hiring and assessing and search firms. But when they have that product market fit and they're going to go, we also have the experience and network to be able to bring those tools to bear to them. So again, you're going to hear a lot of it depends, I think, today, but it depends. But if you can put together a world-class recruiting team and apply that, I think when I joined Google, the biggest thing slowing us down was the lack of hiring. We just couldn't hire enough people, and we were hiring 100 people a week. And then taking that framework to Skype, where, again, we weren't hiring that many people, but we ended up doing about 50 a week by the time we were acquired by Microsoft. But it requires a lot of investing, a lot of resources, and we'd always encourage people to have about 10% of their headcount should be in recruiting if you're scaling up.
Yeah, yeah. And do you see that with your portfolio companies, that this mindset is changing?
Yeah, and again, I was with Tibau yesterday. We're talking to a company that we're very keen to partner with. We don't want them to grow too fast. There's a kind of, when someone like myself or others who have done turbo scaling, they think, oh my God, you're going to scale my company up and we're going to lower the bar. It's not that. It basically is being very efficient. So we will walk them through recruiting concepts, models, time to fill, time it's going to take from the organization. We'll introduce them to benchmark recruiters, just like benchmark salespeople, benchmark marketeers, benchmark engineers. When they see these people and they have a conversation, the light goes on. And it's like, I want this person in my team. But it's definitely changing. And I think founders now understand that they need to be highly competitive. And if they are 6 months behind their hiring plan, they're 6 months behind their product roadmap, behind their sales comp. So the light's definitely gone on.
Yep. Johannes, GetYourGuide became a unicorn quite a while ago. What were your most pressing challenges in the scaling of your organization over the years?
Well, so like people was certainly one of the very pressing challenges. For us, we became a unicorn in 2019, and then so like 2020 and 2021 were obviously terrible years for the travel industry, where we went to zero, and then we kind of like needed to reboot and it's like regrow. So for me, it's been really a roller coaster, and so like I would say the one theme, throughout ultimately was leadership. So making sure that we have the long-term strategy in place, that we hire the right talent, and then that we have sufficient capital and sufficient resources to maintain that longer-term strategic view. I think that's certainly the big challenge, that you have when you're a unicorn. You're typically have this validated large market. There's a massive opportunity, but ultimately your resources are still finite, and the clock is ticking. So you need to really make sure that you place the right big and bold bets. And look, I think doing that always requires a lot of attention from leadership, and also at the end of the day, a lot of agility, as you could see in the years of COVID, where things went very different, and the strategy to succeed there or to come out of it was very different than what we would have probably imagined in 2019. But with all of that being said, I think that's also my message to all of the companies that are now being affected by the current crunch, and that was my #1 learning coming out of COVID. There is an opportunity in every crisis, and I think as a leader, it's your duty to identify that opportunity and to seize it.
Yeah, okay. Bao-Y, should you date a unicorn and marry a donkey? we heard a lot about the fact that unicorns are less interesting for investors right now, and that VCs are looking into companies, call them camels, call them donkeys, it's the same thing, that have bootstrapped, that have a smaller team, but they also get where they want to be. Is that, how do you see this from an investor perspective, this shift in mindset, and how is this going to affect the internationalization strategy of startups and scale-ups?
Yeah, I mean, obviously venture capital, sort of, even though it's all classed within one asset class, right? Like different VCs will be looking for different things. I mean, I think for us, philosophically, I think VC is built on sort of outsized returns, right? And if you're growing, on a small scale, obviously not if you're $1 billion or $2 billion in revenues, but if you're growing on a small scale, right, sort of 20 to 30% year over year, right? It's just really difficult to realize those outsized returns. And so that wouldn't really be, interesting for us, right? I mean, I think at the same time, the times of sort of growth at all costs, right, where, you're growing so crazy, but, if you're actually looking at the bottom line, you're burning just as much or even more, right? I think those are also over. So I think what it means is what we're looking for, right, is sort of intrinsic business models that are not just fueled by capital, right? So if at the moment you sort of stop putting capital in and you're not growing anymore, then maybe you're not really a tech business, right? So I think you need to sort of have some mode in which you continue to grow that is not exclusively fueled by capital. Now, if it's not fueled by capital at all, then I guess you don't need us. But so there is an element of where you need capital, and there's certain points in time, right? Like Johannes says, like first 2 years he was bootstrapped, finding product market fit, and then from there on, you sort of capital can accelerate that. But I think if capital is the exclusive sort of fuel of that, then you're probably not a tech company.
Yeah. What we also see is that a lot of startups and scale-ups now with low valuations are interested in M&A, mergers and acquisitions, instead of the more traditional growth trajectories. Is this a good thing? And in 10 years' time, will we look back to 23 and say that was a great year to take over companies? And because it's an interesting strategy to internationalize as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely something that startups should consider as an option, right? It really depends on the business model again and what exactly you're buying, right? So, for example, the framework, if let's say you're buying scale or a new market, right? Like, so I had this conversation with one of my portfolio companies the other day. If we're calculating it through, if you take the purchase price, you take sort of the integration cost, and also your time spent in assessing this, right? You divide that by let's say your ICP customers, the number of customers that you're getting, how does that actually compare to your customer acquisition cost? And so that's like a good way of sort of benchmarking it, right? That's sort of true for, this was a B2B SaaS company, it's true for B2B SaaS company. I think, for acqui-hires as well, right? You can look at what would you sort of pay and how much would it cost you to acquire this talent otherwise and build the product that they have, right? Like sort of, so I think there's like very quantitative ways of looking at it. So I think you should definitely sort of keep that in mind as an alternative. It doesn't make sense for every business model, but for many it does. And where it does, I'm a huge fan of it. And I think now is a good time if you have the cash to assess that as well.
Yeah. Dan, what's your take on how to build a scalable organization these days?
Going international or just in general? Or both.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to start going into new countries, one thing I've seen work really well is an expansion team. So you have cross-functional teams that land and expand. Having ambassadors, so not necessarily senior people from your organization, but people who are tenured and understand how your company works. So kind of culture bearers, I think they're great sending those people over there. If you're a founder or a co-founder, spending time ideally living in the country or certainly launching that office. Bring in the country manager that you hire to the mothership, if you will, so they're immersed into your culture back in the HQ. And then as a founder, really spending time with the team, doing skip levels and looking at employee survey data or whatever to inspect what you expect. So that country leader basically is an extension of the founder and making sure that the behaviors are appropriate, they're leading by example. So I would keep a very close ear to that. If it's working, great, but if it's not working, move really fast to fix it.
Yeah. Okay, Johannes, I see we're almost running out of time. My last question is for you. What has been the most difficult in building your brand internationally?
I think the most difficult piece, and so like I'll combine it also so like with the overall question. I think that's kind of like here at this panel is like how as a European company can you actually scale? So like Europe, and that's my biggest message to all of the young founders here in this room, is a fantastic market. And I think the great thing about Europe is that we as European companies, we think in multi-market strategies from day one, and we often underestimate what power that is. Like if I look at my American peers, they basically scale in the US for 5 to 10 years, and then they think of, hey, maybe the website should have a different language, right? So like I'm exaggerating to make the point, but GetYourGuide was launched in 2 languages. Like we had not even 2 million in revenue, and then we were like in 5, 6, 7 different countries. And that kind of muscle is just really powerful. Only 15% of GetYourGuide's employees are German, right? 85% are international. So to your point, for a European company, actually scaling your brand in multiple markets is very natural because you do that from day one. I think the one thing that we need to learn from the US companies, though, is as we scale and so like the budgets get bigger, is that we have this very systematic approach in doing it. So for instance, in marketing, because you asked me about that specifically, you need to define your core brand and you need to be really crystal clear around that. And that's something that I sort of see the Silicon Valley peer group being really strong at. And in Europe, oftentimes companies don't take that seriously enough. They're just performance driven or might not be as ambitious and bold about their brand. And so like then when you find product market fit, and I think that's very much to my friends here from the VC group, then you need to invest behind it and you really need to scale. But the mistake that we often do is that we kind of don't really scale, take too many markets too early, and don't find proper product market fit. And last but not least, and that's where like the big warning sign I would put out there, is scale to the US prematurely. I think that's the one biggest mistake that I see from so many European founders. Take advantage of the great European home market, scale across multiple markets, really understand what your flywheel looks like, and then afterwards go to Asia or the US.
Okay, that's a very valuable lesson. I want to thank Dan, I want to thank Bao-Y, I want to thank Johannes for their very interesting insights. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.